So David, we talked a little bit earlier about walking through your diagnostic methodology, and I wanted to kick it off and actually have you walk us through your methodology. Let's dig into some detail. Walk through some of the examples that you think are relevant. And I really wanted you to start it off with talking about when would somebody want to do this? What's different about this than maybe a larger roadmap? Give me a use case that you had to give an example of it. And then let's just dig in and start walking through the slides, and we can go back and forth if that's okay, and just be a little bit informal about the way we walk through this.
Sure, absolutely. Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, so the intent of the diagnostic is actually to give you a current state snapshot of what your environment is with an actual outcome that's actionable and that's meaningful, that focuses on a few core areas that are providing you operational risk, security or compliance concerns, fiduciary or fiscal responsibility concerns, right? Cost optimization, et cetera. And then from there, it actually comes out with a concrete plan within a cycle of time that you can deliver that shows immediate business value.
Right.
In essence, that is why the diagnosis is different to a lot of the other things that you'll encounter across your way.
And if challenged, you've responded to a number of these with our clients already, and depends on the scope that they want and the size of the problem, but we've had some that have had very short periods of time. I mean, how quick can you, given the scope of something, how quick can you get this done and get them to an actionable spot? Depending, obviously it depends a little bit, but how quick can you move on this?
And actually, part of this is actually taking the depends out of it. The expectation is that there is no real depends. We want to make sure, first of all, there is an alignment or recognition that the customer has a problem.
Yeah.
That's usually a barrier. From there, and as I'll go into in further pages in the slide, I'll actually show that there's an approach, right, that's very structured, methodical, right, time-bound driven, and actionable, right? So we'll get that into that comments in a few slides from here. So
Great.
So the intent of the overall diagnostic framework is that we are looking for problems that are solvable within a time frame that is recognized by everybody and see immediate business value. We're looking to see if the IT organization is actually aligned, right, to a particular roadmap itself. Are you actually following a roadmap? Did you have one in place but you're veering because of operational concerns and issues? Are you actually providing data from your core systems to the business to make decisions that they need to? Is your data locked up for some reason because you can't get to it through operational concerns?
And that's been a huge problem for folks. They can't even get the data. They're under pressure to make decisions quickly during this period of time, and they realize they can't even get the data analytics in a way that to be actionable. That would be a good use case for you to and it has been a use case actually for us.
Absolutely. And then even are you secure and compliant practices, right? So on this deck, I'm really highlighting that there's some key objectives that you have to align to first. What is the state of the union? What are your core directives? And then very quickly from there, articulating the plan through a discovery process, which we'll get into, to get an outcome. So.
And general symptoms where clients are experiencing cost overruns, sluggish IT response performance, outages, security breaches, all can be the symptoms that you would apply this methodology to.
Absolutely. There's got to be a burning platform and a reason to engage on this perspective.
Right.
Typically it's more than just one though.
Yeah. So it's compelling event driven, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Yeah, walk us through and let's talk it out.
Sounds good. So as I mentioned, the objectives, we need to align from a business perspective. What are outcomes? What are we trying to do here? What are we trying to qualify from a use case perspective? The other part is it's important to have governance and organizational alignment. If this is just another pet initiative, it actually becomes just part of the existing problem that you have.
Yep.
This has to be almost top-down driven. While I'm not a big advocate of totalitarian approaches to work, these initiatives need executive sponsorship from the very onset to ensure that there's a successful delivery of the outcomes. From there, you look at the operating model. We've talked in prior conversations that there's an easy it's very easy to go align yourself to a who is the problem versus the what and the why. So this is really looking at, culturally, are your organization aligned? Do you have good working operating procedures? Do you have a good, healthy, open culture for discussion? Do you have a delivery model that meets the expectations for quick delivery of situations? Do you have decision rights at the front level? Do you have a culture of innovation? These can seem quite extensive, but very quickly through our design thinking and ideation sessions, we'll quickly hone in on how well the operating model is working from there. The crux of the conversations, obviously we're in IT, so we're really talking about, are the investments that you've made, are they going to satisfy the requirements of the fit for purpose and warranty for which you brought them in? 9 times out of 10 we're brought in because an operational issue due to technology failures, perceived, right, are part of the problem. So we're going to take a healthy look at anything from enterprise architecture standards, are your applications and systems built compared to where they were initially designed for?
Were your projects properly funded?
Were your projects properly funded, or did you bail halfway and still expect operations to take them over? So we'll take a look at that. And then ultimately, we also want to take a look at, from a financial optimization perspective, we should always take the economic view.
Yes.
That's, we're all business leaders at the end of the day. And so from that lens, are we looking at effective budget management? Are we got cost containment measures in place? Are we looking at effective cost-effective sourcing? So,
how much you got, and I don't want to interrupt your flow here, but
yes.
How much you take in the context of where they're in the deal cycle? This has been a huge issue. Obviously, if they're in exit readiness, understanding the scope and the length of projects comes into play. How much do you really understand the deal thesis and where they're at on that life cycle?
Yeah, I think it's important to understand that would be really aligned at the business priority level
Yep.
and objectives. Obviously, an organization that maybe have just exited, a TSA or a carve out or a platform or a roll up, you may have lingering issues based on the TSA, but you probably have plans or readiness plans to maybe address them. Versus an organization that have maybe are there in half life, right, between a cell, maybe getting ready for an acquisition of cell where they're just consistently having operational issues. And obviously, the worst case scenario is you're getting ready for cell and you discover through due diligence and others you have a lot of operational overhead that you weren't accounting for.
That's right.
So I think the approach doesn't change, Jeff. I think very quickly you understand where you are from business priorities perspective and objectives, and it will then it will also help us fine tune and prioritize what actually makes sense. Different parts of the diagnostic will make sense for where you are in the deal structure.
Yep.
Okay. So from there, a little deeper dive into the business priority. So we've talked about we need to understand the key business needs that we want IT to enable. A big part is perception. What is the perception? Unfortunately, I don't think a lot of organizations are kind of inward and outward looking. They don't solicit a lot of feedback. They may perceive that their system's uptime is the vanity metric that the businesses are looking for, but that 1 minute of downtime could be $1 million worth of revenue loss because there's no alignment. So I think actually understanding what the business perception is. Again, stakeholder ownership is a big part of these diagnostics. And then again, what are the key business needs that IT should enable? Again, this is not an IT-driven effort. It is a real part of the business, and understand how quickly we can align to what their objectives are. Again, it helps us, navigate and come and boil down the opportunities to a more succinct grouping. From there, the operating model, right? Again, we're looking at internal, externally sourced capabilities. Do we have governance in models? Do we have too much governance? We find often that organizations, specifically large organizations, have legacy governance models where they expect, again, top-down level control. What we're looking for is minimum governance and maximum adoption to that, right?
And nobody's seen what over-governance looks like versus some of your former employers in the energy business, in the California energy business.
Exactly, and part of that is ensuring that this could just be a process issue. And I think people overlook that it doesn't have to actually be anything physically tangible. That it could just be the way the work is flowing through the system.
Right.
So we talk about operating models in place, and then also how effective are we in service delivery. This goes back to how often are we measuring ourselves? Do we have any way of calibrating the way that we perform? So a lot of this is also doing upfront assessment, with the business and giving them basically a customer value map where we kind of measure them on 8 dimensions, right, of value. And then the customer comes back and tells us where they are against that. So sometimes it's eye-opening, right?
Yep.
More mature organizations typically know where they sit. And again, the diagnostic is not just limited to technology. So then we move on. So again, what is the technology stack? What's the footprint? What was the strategy? What's the operating plan? Are we sticking to it? Are we deviating it? Do we have so much operational noise that we just can't continue to operate? One good example of this is 2019, 2020 saw a lot of systems from a operating system perspective. So Microsoft, Oracle, VMware, a lot of those companies had a lot of end of life, end of sell
Yes.
services. It changed the OEM strategies and the way that you relicense and procure. Well, a lot of companies knew it was coming, did nothing about it, were frozen, stuck. and then now have to leave the repercussions. The problem is none of those systems are maintainable, supportable, or portable, which means now that they inherently have operational risk and issues and they're dealing with it every day, but yet the answer is staring them in the face, right? And obviously I'm not naive enough to think that there's an easy answer to all of it, but sometimes you've unsupportable systems yet you're having operational issues. The answer is quite clear.
Right.
What to do with that. Is our architecture also suitable for the foundation? Now, we will go into the artifacts towards the end about the outcomes. There are short-term gains and there are long-term gains. We're not committing here that a diagnostic is going to fix everything you have. That's not the intent. We're focused on value realized benefits out of the gate, but we're also not short-sighted enough to not leave you with a potential plan, because again, it takes time, right? Roadmaps are created. This is just filling the gaps to ensure that any of the solutions that we may provide to you could have long-term impacts, right? And you may have to shift certain things around to fix that. So, and the last one, again, taking the economic view, what is our current spend? Is it rationalized? We bring a lot of benchmarking information in, right? I think benchmarking information is under leveraged. I think the understanding where you are from a conversation perspective, even with your executive team, your executive finance branches, sometimes it's eye-opening to use supporting data to look at where you are. I mentioned total cost of ownership. If you don't even understand where you are, right, for how effective and healthy your organization is financially, it's going to be very hard for you to justify any other investments when you can't even quantify what you have today. We talked about procurement and supplier spend. Are we spending the right area in the right amounts? We talked about that from a benchmarking perspective. And then are there opportunities to improve efficiency? And I don't mean, Jeff, cost cutting.
Right.
Cost cutting, again, is an easy knee-jerk reaction to something that you haven't really thought through. I'm talking about, are you looking at optimizing your supplier range? Are you looking at getting rid of the long tail of your spend organization? Are you looking at your contract value? Are you actually renegotiating contracts? I think there's an expectation that once you sign up for a contract that you can't commit or reassess that within its lifespan. I mean, that's actually not true, right? So it's just making sure that you've kind of gone down these avenues before you actually make.
And do you know how to, right?
And do you know how to?
The Oracles and Microsofts of the world, those are deep and tricky waters that require a lot of experience to get through in an optimal state. Right?
Absolutely. But negotiation doesn't have to also mean that you're moving out of commitment. It could also mean that you're increasing their market share.
That's right.
And that's a cost optimization play plus a technology strategy play too.
Yep.
So as you can see, you start tying these together. They don't stand by themselves. Any one of these pillars not together actually makes the whole foundation crumble. So it's essential that you kind of put all four of these together from a recipe perspective. So from there, we've obviously established, the why, what, and this is really the how. So we have a very pragmatic approach to being able to do this. So we engage very early, and we like to run, a sprint-based model from an agile concept perspective. What I like about the sprints, Jeff, is that they allow you to quickly retrospect, reflect, gather the information you've had, see if you're on the right path.
Right.
And also provide transparency and clarity to the organization about what you're doing, and then be able to then very quickly also validate what the sprint was supposed to add. The good thing about, let's face it, if we all disappear for 6 weeks and come back, we probably forgot what we wanted to start in the first place. These short-term sprints enable us to be able to very much focus an organization, not get distracted by outside influences, and come out with an output.
And we talked earlier about, this was really ground zero for a lot of IT inefficiency, that these initiatives start and they just kind of take on a life of their own. They lead to other things. It's very easily to get rolled up into a larger initiative that you didn't intend out of the gate. And you had introduced that concept to us, and I really like that whole, lean sprint concept of accomplishing short things and reevaluating early in the process versus letting, the budgets ran out and then, okay, now the big surprises are coming. We haven't accomplished anything and the budget expanding. You bring a lot of discipline to that area that I think is partly the reason why this service exists, because of this scope creep of what IT transformation, gets involved with. So.
Absolutely. And based on that, thank you for the lead in, it moves down to, even if we did this very methodical approach in a very fast-paced iteration, if you weren't disciplined about the priority of what those are, you actually would, again, you're right, you would spider web out into multiple opportunities and then you would get the same creep as you had before. So the second stage of this is really looking at blueprinting the priorities. Okay, let's value stream map these out. Let's figure out which ones have the highest impact with the lowest cost to achieve. very quickly you'll see, right, through the mechanism of prioritization, and this is business prioritization, what's the value of this service, how long will it take? If something is, going to create a widget that only 1% of the organization is going to be able to leverage, doesn't make a lot of sense, and it costs $1 million.
And this is an important spot.
Absolutely.
That I see. IT projects are like baggage. You just keep on throwing a new bag. Well, we're only going to go down this road this one time, so we're already going to go past this. Why don't we pick up this one extra thing? And it just adds complexity. It slows the process down, and it really ends up stalling. You achieve nothing. So you've assigned up to broaden the scope out. I like this narrowing of priorities so that you're not taking the baggage on, you're accomplishing things, gaining ROI from it, and using those. And everybody's so afraid of revisiting things later because they're like, well, we don't have time to do it twice. But by continuing to look back at what the goal was, what the ROI is, and achieving some tangible output that's tangible for the business, that success allows the next sprint to take place, right?
Yep.
And so I think it's a very healthy process.
Yeah, you mentioned ROI. I also want to be very clear. This is not just a financial output, but there is a return on the investment of the work that you're putting, and that is really during the initial upfront diagnostic and the assessments of the environment. If you have a lack of clarity of where you are in the business value chain, it's very then difficult for you to not realize anything other than a cost benefit. I'll give you an example. If you don't understand that, say, your core mainframe environments or your AS400s or ERP system, the infrastructure running that has a detrimental effect to month-end closures, right, or inventory management runs in the middle of the month or every 6 months, but your systems go down, you've got a complete impact. There's no ROI model there,
right,
but the business is impacted, right, and it may be a soft cost internally, and by the way, those are okay.
right,
Because it's all part of doing business, right? It's all part of your P&L, right? So I think part of that is understanding that stakeholders, executive stakeholders, they understand that it's not a financial only play. It's about a business optimization, and they also have to lean in on what those business values are.
Yep.
So be very careful about making this into just a financial play only. That's not the intent. So from there, you move on to, obviously, you blueprinted the priorities. You have to actually move and say, okay, well, let's validate this hypothesis. What I like about this assessment is that we don't actually commit to long-term plans out of it. We actually validate, right? Just like you would do in R&D and innovation, you create your hypothesis, you document your thesis statement, and then you go test that out in a very quick cycle and figure out if it sticks. And I'm talking about something minimal viable, right? And something that you can quickly come back and say, what was our findings? The intent is not to have a 6-month project and go, oh wow, that wasn't what we're looking for, right? So the same approach from a sprint-based, reflect, retrospect, bring back those results. What do we think? The good thing about that, if something doesn't work, you can throw it up very quickly.
Yeah.
Right. And then the last one, obviously, is once those recommendations come back, we've monitored, we've adjusted roadblocks, we figure out, what are the unintended consequences of doing this, what are the roadblocks that could happen, and measure the success. Then we go back and actually make the formal recommendation from a program structure, whether it's a short term or long term. And then from there, you have a finalized plan, and then that's approved.
Great.
Okay. So Jeff, so based on that, we've talked about the why, the what, and the how. Now we're going to talk about kind of the recommendations and what we've learned from that.
Okay.
So part of this, obviously, what we're looking for is long-term sustainability. If we're here every single month, right, having diagnostics and fixing issues, we've obviously done something intently wrong. And the intent, again, is not a roadmap, but it's to ensure that we've also left behind a methodology that the customer can understand, can work with, show them that the process and the approach is actually tangible and it works, and then leave them with that artifact. Right? Our job is not to stay there and continue to be on the ground all the time. Now, obviously, we will help and can help and have services and managed services to help with the remediation of the items. But again, I want to leave the customers with an artifact and an approach, right, for them to actually be able to qualify problems.
Well, you're showing them how to break through when they're stuck.
Exactly.
And narrow the focus down to accomplish things to move forward. And so, yes, we are often brought in to fix a problem, but you're teaching them how to fish as well, so that they can do it on their own. I think that's an important thing.
Exactly. And some of the things we can come and look at are, recommendations that we may have learned. Maybe the cloud strategy was incorrect or not being leveraged correctly. We have the ability to look at contract optimizations. We're looking at procedure reviews from operations. Some of this could be security and awareness, organizational change management recommendations. So there's many things on a checklist that they may already have that will either go, yep, that's an area of concern that we either need to do more of, or you may even say, look, less of.
Right.
You don't actually need to do these. They're
That's
actually
right.
adding no value organization. So we've talked about what problem spots they are. We'd be remiss to actually not advise against areas where they probably don't have any value and they're doing for no reason.
And think about all the world's changed in the last 90 days. There are things that we thought we couldn't do without 90 days ago that we've done without.
Right.
And we're all starting to wonder, do we really need something, our offices, do we still need offices, right? I mean, not to carry to an extreme, but
Right.
the world's changed a little bit, and reflecting back on what is the use, does this still make sense? That maps down to an IT level too, but it's not very visible from the investment standpoint. And IT, it's so confusing because of all the challenges. It's easy to get lost in the detail of the emergencies we've dealt with and the transformations that we've gone through. So yeah, it's
Absolutely.
good.
So Jeff, moving on to an example output. So this is an example of, once we've gone through the process in the very end. So this first example output would be a short-term recommendation. We're looking at levers, for example. Now, while I said it's not only about cost optimization, typically some of the cost levers are probably the biggest pressure points that the business wants to get immediate concerns on. So in this particular example, we're looking at, the prioritization of planned projects. We could free up misuse capital or reallocate capital just by looking at the work itself. Is it relevant? Is it not? Is it something that you can basically stop and maybe pick up another point, right? That's a cost optimization lever. It's actually a very effective one. If you can free up capital, working capital in an organization, or even, from operating expense, reallocate services and funds somewhere else, you're not taking out of the system, you're just prioritizing and reallocating it. Again, another one could be, rationalizing in vendor contracts. While I completely understand that some of these might be in long term, again, the tail. Right? If you have $1 million budget and you've got 20% of your spend being spent with 80% of your vendor base, you don't need 80%. Your vendor's only spending 20% of your proportion of spend. And
have we reached a point in the world where whatever contract you had, there's an expectation that it's going to be renegotiated based on the emergency we've been through? Are people really capitalizing on those opportunities that exist right now? Because
correct.
Vendors they're worried. Their revenues are down, and I might be open now to actually taking a second look at that, whereas normally they wouldn't.
And this recommendation, also from my perspective, I would rather this be a recommendation of the IT organization. I've noticed that other customers, through my conversations and through peer groups, that finance organizations are actually making these on the behalf. While they are a financial commitment on behalf of a company, you probably want to be the person leading that conversation versus being on the end of it. And quite frankly, you really can't blame the business when they say, look, a technology stack is a technology stack, it's a technology stack. So this really goes with rationalizing your technology roadmap, but just something to look out for. And obviously, these are some of the statistics as well around, what we've seen. And this would be an example where we've said the reason we were burning platform was outages led to this much downtime, or our benchmark spending is going in a disproportionate direction compared to others, or we're spending in the wrong categories versus the ones that we should be to shore up our foundations or application stacks, etc. So from a long-term recommendation perspective, so we pivot a little bit. Obviously, organization, very hard to make short-term commitments. I actually advise against any short-term organizational alignments. It's very disruptive, highly disruptive, I would say. It provides lack of clarity, lack of guidance. The last thing you need in a disruptive estate is your disruptive organization, and certainly an organization in your ranks. It's very disruptive.
Yeah.
This is actually a time for good leaders to actually rally, empower the organizations, work to the front line, and become a servant leader for them during these times of crisis versus imposing a totalitarian and a hierarchy in place. So operating model, ensuring decision making, improving communications, strengthen prioritization. Prioritization is actually probably one of the weakest links that a lot of IT organizations have. A lot of companies have in general. It's very hard to prioritize, understandably so. Specifically in crisis, where you think everything that you may do may be the savior. I implore the organizations through the diagnostic really stick. The whole point is that you actually have a set of priorities that you actually follow and stick to, and then you work the backlog right through a governance process. But obviously, from a long-term perspective, you can also strengthen existing business cases that you may have already executed. This might actually provide you that second level of ammunition that you need to get the work done.
And it's been tough over the last couple of years.
Yep.
Not only we have emergencies, but there are initiatives that are already in play, and then there's all this unplanned stuff. Well, the staff didn't get bigger. Right at a moment in time, they're probably being asked to cut costs. So prioritization, I couldn't agree more, is right at the top of the list of, okay, hang on a second. We had big plans. We didn't know all this stuff was going to happen, and we had too ambitious of initiatives based on the emergencies that have come up. What should we be focused on right now versus spinning all those plates a little bit and they're all falling, right? And that's what's happening in a lot of places.
Absolutely. And one thing I also want to iterate an operating model. Jeff, you and I have been in the industry for quite a while, and we've both, and I specifically have worked as a customer for a very long time, and not naive enough to think that prioritizations are going to sometimes be overridden. The major secret is to be transparent with organizations.
Yes.
A part of this is really being open, putting the plans out there. As decisions change, don't shelter them. Be more open. You'll find actually most people come in to do good things, right?
Yes,
Most of our employees are coming every day to do a great job.
That's right.
All they want to do is be treated with a little bit of openness, right, and clarity.
Assume good intent.
Exactly. And if you as a leader are humble and kind of lean in, I think that kind of vulnerability lends itself to teams wanting to step up and actually take care of it. So there's actually no magic sauce in that particular recommendation. But also, I want to, for our readers and listeners, I want to make sure they understand that we know that priorities are hard to influence, but priorities can be sometimes managed through transparency and clarity.
Yeah.
Technical foundations, obviously you can't shift and sometimes, move a freighter. So you have to be really thoughtful about this. Large mistakes are made with that, like you mentioned, what they assume are smart money being spent, but it fills a gap now.
Right.
And you haven't thought long enough about what actually happened. That's why I'm not a big advocate of making technology changes on the short-term recommendations.
Yes.
They really need to be more long-term,
right,
to ensure that you've actually got the other components out the way first before looking at those. And then obviously resources. So, budgeting, do you understand total cost of ownership? You have better alignment with business, and then you can start looking at your labor model fix as well. We see too much reliance on offshore or outsourcing versus insourcing, right? You ultimately as a business, going back to the tie into the objectives, we'll know what your core value is. Start thinking about shifting work left. Start thinking about things like, RPA if you need it, robotic process automation. Think about automation in your work stack. Think about shifting that non-essential work out of your way or to somebody else. It's, and so for you to focus on what's core to the business.
Especially in the mid-market, right?
Especially in the mid-market.
It's just tough. They've got the economies of scale and the diversity of skill sets you need to bring to the table is a little overwhelming for mid-market staffs right now. So
absolutely. So Jeff, I'm just moving on from the recommendations just to really look at, while we can talk about a good game about the work we do, what we're doing, and what the recommendations are, it wouldn't be RKON if we actually didn't provide artifacts to support it. And that's what goes back to the tangible approach that we have. We actually have an actionable plan that you can execute on. So here I'm just showing that these recommendations are actually more than that. They're actually, like I said, they're management action plans that you can follow to execute. So this one is basically looking at optimization opportunities for vendor consolidation. Can you review and rank? Can you cut contracts? Can you consolidate? Can you renegotiate? Can you enforce, tighter models with RFP process? Whatever it looks like, but we give you examples and we can work with you on this. The next one is really looking at kind of your application, your technology stack. So the other one was more about cost optimization. This was more about technology optimization. This is an example output of a rationalization effort. Again, sometimes there may be 15 applications doing one business function, right? There's overabundance. One organization wanted a requirement one way, somebody else did it. Next thing you know,
we see that in platforms a lot, right?
Yes.
They've combined 14 companies, but they're all kind of running their own version of their redundant applications, and they're just having difficulty making those decisions. And it's not a technology issue; sometimes it's a political issue.
It's a political issue, exactly. So the next one's really talking about technology stack optimization. We're looking at we've seen duplicity in multiple application stacks, right? And what that does, that builds up your legacy tech debt, right. In your environment.
Especially in platform roll-ups where they've tried to combine a lot of companies. They had every intention of consolidating and rationalizing, but the truth is all those entities might still be operating their own
Correct.
unique little software that adds, takes away from economies of scale adds complexity to
Yeah,
IT.
you're absolutely right, Jeff. Yeah, so from there we look at the opportunity, we look at kind of systems, we categorize them by the business opportunity. We look at, can they be retired, can they be decommissioned, can they be rationalized, can they be consolidated? We put a benefits assumption model together. Again, assumptions, not business, we don't know yet, because again, we're trying to do a minimal viable outcome of this. And then if our assumptions become right, we help you with business case, and maybe part of this was already part of an investment plan that you wanted. We've just now double validated your assumptions from the diagnostic. The next one's pivoting to a specific application. Now we notice that, especially in the mid-market, there are probably typically two to five core applications or stacks that really drive the business, whether it's their ERP platform, the manufacturing systems, maybe some intellectual property from a data perspective. We get a lot to actually assess those environments. Somewhat different to rationalization of supporting stacks. This is more as, does the system of today meet our requirements for tomorrow?
Right.
So this is an example where we've looked at an ERP created high operation costs, and we came in and looked at, they had a custom application stack. We wanted to understand, based on the requirements and their compliance requirements and their business functions, to replace it with the right size application stack, and then also thankfully so, that it also an estimated savings, because not just because of the application stack, but also the associated operations and the systems that supported them too. So, we look for many different dimensions. We don't just recommend a change of technology stack just for changing its sakes.
That's right, and I remember in that case, there was a high benchmark of IT labor costs, and they were trying to focus on that, but it was actually rooted in a customized IT application stack that could have been standardized before that IT labor can be reduced or optimized. So yeah, it's the issue's never always, the symptom is not always the problem. So
exactly. So Jeff, I hope today was a good overview of our diagnostic framework. Again, I truly believe with a more succinct approach around doing it, a methodology that is time bound and is actionable. And then with an understanding that you can do this repeatedly without having to continually start, and ultimately leaves you with short-term and long-term benefits. I believe IT diagnostic is absolutely a tool that a lot of our partners and customers should be leveraging. I think there's a lot of pent-up demand and interest in the approach, and happy to talk with any of our customers after this if there's interest in what we do. So
we have a lot of new clients that we're talking to. How much are you open to engaging with them, before dollars are exchanged, just to understand it and give them value out of the gate? Because there's a lot of economic pressure right now. People they're trying to cut costs. The last thing they want to do is sign up for an expensive study, and so this is a shorter version of that. But are you willing to engage with our clients and kind of take the first few steps before you're on the clock?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's actually the value that RKON brings to the table. Right, we want to fix our customers' problems. Right. Our job is to understand and help guide and navigate them. We're in for the long run.
Right.
We know that based on our customer base and the history that we've had. And absolutely, that is our role, to get in, to actually qualify whether there's even a problem statement in the first place. It may be a simple fix, and what we don't want to do is propose an outlay, for something that could be quite minimal. But absolutely happy to talk to any of our customers who are willing to look at this from an overview perspective, and even understand if there's something that's a fit for them. And
we've been good about putting some skin in the game, early stage, so that we have a shared outcome, mutual success. So
well, absolutely. I think that's the biggest piece out of this. It is a shared outcome, because we are invested in the customer success as much as they are. We want to be customer obsessed and customer focused, and I think this is just another way that we show that. Yeah, great overview. This was very thoughtful, well put together. Thanks for your time today. Thank you, Jeff.